Welcome to this video about the 6 principles of genetics. The first principle is that traits or characteristics are passed from one generation to the next. We talked about this when we said that Mendel noticed that parents tended to pass traits on to offspring. The second principle of genetics is that traits of an organism are controlled by genes. So what we see in this diagram are an illustration of long segments of DNA, and different regions of this DNA are coding for different traits. So there's gene A, there's gene B, there's gene C, and so on. A third principle of genetics is that organisms inherit genes in pairs with one gene coming from each parent. So in this system we have dad, we have mom. The dad undergoes meiosis to produce a sex cell, as does the mom, where they reduce their number of chromosomes in half, and when these two sex cells join together, it forms a new zygote, new organism with 2 copies of every chromosome, one coming from each parent. The fourth principle of genetics is that some genes are dominant, whereas other genes are recessive. So for the next slide or two, we're going to talk about the example of black hair being dominant over red hair. So 2 different versions of the same gene, one dominant, one recessive. When this happens, you have 3 different possible combinations of genes or alleles. So this is one genotype, and this individual will have black hair. This individual down here will have red hair because they have 2 red hair alleles. But when you have an individual who is heterozygous and has 2 copies of this, well, 2 different copies, one black and one red, this person will still end up with black hair because the dominant is masking the recessive. This is not always the case, and this brings us to our last principle of genetics. Some genes are neither dominant nor recessive. We've talked about this as being 2 genes being equally dominant. These genes are showing codominance, or another system we haven't talked about is incomplete dominance. We saw this when we looked at this cow. This cow has a dominant red allele and a dominant white allele, and so it appears both red and white. Well, those are the 6 main principles of genetics. For more information about them, you can read the 2 sections in our book from page 80 to page 93, or you can visit www.dnaftb.org. This is a great website that reviews a lot of the major principles and discoveries in the field of genetics.